Chairman, I can't imagine in any world that anyone from any political party would call what happened and transpired as a result of pro-growth policies a tax scam. You would have to have the fundamental belief that it's a scam, because that's not the American people's money that we're playing with here in Washington, that's actually rightfully the government's money, I think. Because there's no way to describe the lowest poverty rates in recorded history as a scam. There's no way to describe the results of the Trump tax cuts and the broader Trump economic agenda, deregulation, America First trade, and the results of the highest capital investment ever, highest R&D investment ever, lowest unemployment rates for minorities and women ever. No repatriation of our jobs and businesses overseas, but repatriated capital, repatriated businesses, repatriated jobs from overseas back to the great US of A. Now, if that's a scam, as they say, I got some oceanfront property in West Texas to sell you. Everyone benefited. And those on the lower income spectrum benefited the most. Actually, the top 1% paid more. So it got more progressive in that sense. But all boats rose on the tide of prosperity as a result of good, low, competitive tax rates for our country and for our families. I guess my colleagues want to go back to when we had higher tax rates than communist China. What's pro-American about that? How are we going to unleash economic growth, job creation, and prosperity with that kind of tax rate? And we reduced it to 21%. We're not even in the top quarter of the most competitive tax rates. So I guess my colleagues want to go back to being the highest business tax rate in the free world. It makes no sense. The American people had the clearest contrast between my colleagues' policies and the associated effects on our families and our economy relative to the Republicans' policies and associated effects on families and the economy. We've never had a clear contrast between the two, because we had total control when we passed TCJA. They've had total control for the last, not the last 4 years, but the 2 previous years. And there's no comparison. Think about the last 4 years. We've had the worst, most regressive tax in 40 years, called inflation, on working families. We had $8 trillion in deficit spending. We had higher taxes, a barrage of regulations on our small businesses, our job creation engine. We stomped the production of domestic energy, the lifeblood of our economy, repeatedly with a whole of government assault. Why wouldn't we have experienced the inflationary firestorm and the cost of living crisis that is decimating families today? Why wouldn't we? With those failed economic policies and the reckless spending combined, we were paying people not to work. We were expanding welfare without even the reasonable common sense expectation that if you're able to work and you receive social services on behalf of the American people, that you ought to be looking for a job or working at least 20 hours a week. The American people were clear about what was on the ballot here. And they didn't want any more of the last 4 years. We could not have suffered any more. We need to lock in low tax rates for our families in relief, for heaven's sakes. What did they lose in their income over the last 5 years? And now what would happen? Let me ask a question in 15 seconds, Ms. Gallagher. What would happen to a working family if you put a $5,000 tax hike on them right now on the heels of the last 4 years of having inflation burn a hole in their budget, in their pocketbook, what would that do to them? You've interacted personally with them, so
Yes.
you can tell this story. I want to hear it, and I'm out of time. So can she answer that question, Mr. Chairman?
Quickly.
Please.
I'll be brief. They will tighten their belts, meaning they will have less money to put back into their households and into their communities, which will then stifle more economic growth. So it becomes problematic.
Especially when the credit card debt is the highest it's ever been, especially when consumer debt's the highest it's ever been, especially when we just added $3 trillion in consumer debt, especially when their APR went up by 50%. They're out of money. They don't have any more credit cards. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.